The good, say the mystics of spirit, is God, a being whose only definition is that he is beyond man's power to conceive, a definition that invalidates man's consciousness and nullifies his concepts of existence. The good, say the mystics of muscle, is society, a thing which they define as an organism that possesses no physical form, a super being embodied in no one in particular and in everyone in general, except yourself. The purpose of man's life, say both, is to become an abject zombie who serves a purpose he does not know for reasons he is not to question. And that was said by Ayn Rand. Welcome to Surviving the Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Maxwell Egan. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and I'll be your host for the next hour. And I'd like to send out a quick hi to Warren and Joe and Simone and the crew from Kalki Book and Video Store in the Western Australian town of Nannup, where I was last weekend giving a talk, and thank you to all those who attended. It was very nice to spend some time there and to meet all the people who came to the presentation and all those who came to the meet-up the next day. It was a very nice weekend, and thanks again for inviting me. Now, what is mankind really? What are we really here on the earth? And what is our relationship to the earth? I mean, the earth is something that we seem to take for granted very often. I mean, we don't in some ways. I mean, there are many environmental movements and all of this sort of thing, save the whales, save the forest, all this sort of stuff. But generally speaking, and looking at it from a broader perspective, we do tend to take the earth for granted. It's just something that's there. It's where we get our resources, it's where we grow our crops, it's where we get our food. It's just where we do stuff. I mean, sure, we do have environmental concerns over many issues and things like this, but we tend to simply look at Earth from the perspective of how it serves us. We don't really tend to look at it from a deeper perspective and look at what our relationship to it really is. But really, when you look at it, what you see is that Earth is what gives us our life. Earth really is who we are. Very notably, without it, we would be in a particularly uncomfortable position, folks. We'd just be floating through space. And it's important for us to understand this, and it's important for us to see that we are intrinsically connected and intertwined with the path of the earth. Now, there are many belief systems and many ideas about what the earth is. If you look at Igan theory suggests that the earth is a living organism, and we are cohabiting with the earth and on the earth, and we are linked to each other, and that's a very interesting perspective, and it's one that actually stands to reason in many ways as well. But ultimately, looking at it from a perspective of man and our relationship to Earth, what Earth really is for us is our heritage. It is our birthright. It is the place that gives life to us and provides the mechanism by which to sustain that life. And due to the short time that we spend upon the Earth, it is also very clear that the time that each of us spends upon the earth is, in fact, one of custodianship, more than anything else. That's essentially what we are, folks. We are the custodians of the earth, for ourselves, and most importantly, for those who come after. But more importantly than that, what the earth is in relation to us is, as I said, our heritage and our birthright. And this can be easily proven, folks, because this is where we are. I mean, the earth is what provides us with life. And the earth really isn't anything that anybody can actually own. And there may be a lot of people out there that take offense to that and disagree with that statement, but ultimately, folks, you don't own the earth. You don't own any part of the earth. You're here for, 60 to 100 years? That's really only a very short time. The earth has been around for at least 4.6 billion at the moment and counting. So really, when you look at it, you don't really own anything. Trust me on this. I mean, sure, you may have a few possessions and all this sort of stuff that you call your own, and that's fair enough. I'm not saying that people shouldn't own property and that people can't own property. I'm simply attempting to help people understand what their relationship to the earth is. You don't own it, folks. You're only here for a little while. You can't possibly own something that's far, far older than you are and continues after you're gone, especially something that many people perceive to be alive, such as the earth. And many people do. They perceive the earth to be a living organism. And that's not so far-fetched. Our problem is that we tend to anthropomorphize things. We only view a living organism by our perspective of what a living organism should be based on our education system and the way we view reality. And I would suggest that the way modern society views reality is pretty far removed from the truth. So I think our perception of what is and is not alive may be based on some flawed principles to begin with. And perhaps if we were to broaden our perspective, we would be able to see things a little differently. I would suggest that as the Earth is simply really a rock floating through space and it supports so much life, would very much suggest that it is alive, simply by the nature of its being. Again, folks, it just depends on your perspective. But the thing is, what I'm attempting to say here, folks, is that the Earth and ourselves, mankind, and all animal life, and all plant life, and all life upon the planet are indelibly intertwined. And you can't own the Earth. The Earth, if anything, owns us. It is what gives life to us. Earth does not receive its life from us. It's very much the other way around. So looking at things from that perspective, perhaps you can step back for a minute, even if you are one that supports ownership of Earth and ownership of land. If you could just look at it from this perspective for a moment and step back and perceive that, okay, here we are, a species that is on a planet that owns us. We do not own it. You cannot really own the Earth. As I said, simply because of the short duration of time that you actually spend upon the Earth. So what if you were of the mind that you would like to own the Earth, and not just a part of the Earth, but the entire Earth? How would you go about it? And more importantly, how would you go about it if you were living within the parameters of a society that knew the Earth was its natural heritage, and that you can't own the Earth owns you, and that the Earth is what gives us life, and it was given to us freely by the Creator, whatever you perceive your Creator to be? How would you be able to steal the Earth from these people and steal the heritage from these people? How would you convince these people to give up their heritage, give up their birthright, and hand the keys to all of it over to you?
Well, folks, the first step would be to convince people that ownership is real. You would have to convince people that they actually own a particular piece of earth. And then if you were to enslave them to a monetary system which is designed to implode and eventually transfer all the wealth into the hands of those who issue the currency, then eventually you would have the land that they believed they owned transferred into your hands, and it would happen in such a way that they would perceive that you now owned the land. And as I said, this could be very easily achieved simply by controlling the money supply. Money is really incredible stuff, folks. Money is a talisman for control. I've said this to you many, many times. Money affects people in certain ways. It affects the mind. It's like an economic pathogen, and it stands as a very effective control mechanism. Even now, with the raping of the planet that we see happening, especially here in Australia, I imagine it's happening in other countries as well, unbeknownst to most of the world, except for those that would be local to the areas. This tends to happen. We know that mining goes on everywhere, but the extent of it really is kept sort of swept under the rug, and it's only really noticed by the people who live in the areas where it's happening. But here in Australia, there is an enormous amount of mining that's happening, and people are kept in a state of scarcity. They're kept struggling within the parameters of this society, and they find it very, very difficult to make a comfortable living if they reside within the built-up and business areas of society. And so many people go and work the mines, because what they find is that going and working the mines, which is really not that hard if you're using the big machinery that they're given these days, they can go and make $100,000 a year in the mines. So they can go and work for a couple of years, 5 years in the mines, and make enough money to set themselves up for the rest of their lives and come back and start quite a good business somewhere. And so working in the mining industry is a very attractive prospect for many people, because in a short space of time they can garner enough security to get them what they want, because they perceive ownership is real. They go and buy some land somewhere or a house somewhere, and then they believe that they own that. But really, folks, you don't own it. Because you can't just go and buy a piece of land and build a house and live there. Once you own a piece of land, there are so many costs involved in maintaining that ownership that it becomes obvious that you don't own it. If you did own it, why do you have to keep paying for it? It becomes obvious that the whole concept of ownership is completely and utterly ridiculous. It's ludicrous that you should have to keep paying for something that you already apparently own. And that's what I mean. See, before you owned it, it was just land. It was just earth sitting there. Nobody owned it. It was just a part of the planet. And then you came along and you perceived that you owned it. And you're given this little piece of paper that says you're the title holder and all this sort of stuff in this fictional world that we live in. And this tells you that this is your little piece of earth. But then if you don't maintain the payments on it, and bear in mind that, of course, you're being forced to function within the parameters of a psychopathic system which ensures that you remain in scarcity, eventually you're not going to be able to make these payments. And so that land is going to be transferred into the hands of the bank. And the bank is owned by one of the bigwigs who owns such things. And you'll find that all banks are actually owned by the 4 major banking cartels, and you'll find that these 4 major banking cartels also control the 4 major oil companies. And that's eventually who it all transfers to, folks. That's where all the wealth transfers to. But first, people have to be tricked into believing that they own the land. But like I said, before you came along, it was just a piece of earth. Now you come and get involved and you superimpose this economic model over that piece of earth, and eventually that piece of earth is perceived to be transferred into the hands of those who control the economic model. So it's basically tricking people into giving up their heritage and tricking people into thinking that someone else owns the earth. It's really just an effective way of dispossessing mankind. And it's been going on for a very long time, folks. That's what this whole monetary system is, this whole usurious monetary system, the usurious model that we've got, the financial system that we've got, is designed to do this. It's designed to dispossess the people of Earth of their heritage. And it does it in a very, very subtle way, so that the people don't really notice it happening. And it's done by tricking people into believing that they can actually own a piece of the planet, when they can't, because you can't own the Earth, folks. And really, folks, the problem here doesn't lie in the fact that people want somewhere and need somewhere that is secure, somewhere that they can call their home, somewhere that they can be and spend their life, and something to hand down to their children. But the thing is, we can do this without ownership. It's just the syntax of ownership. When really, and as I explained earlier, you're only here for a little time. So how can you actually own the Earth? You don't really own it, because your role here is not one of ownership. Your role here is one of custodianship. And imagine if people viewed the piece of earth that they have chosen for their home as one of custodianship rather than one of ownership. I really believe that people would treat the earth in a very different manner. People would view their land in a very different manner. You could have land, but you are the custodian of that land. Your family are the custodians of that land. You can hand that land down to your children. You can improve that land and make that land a beautiful place to be. Hand it down to your family. Your family will always have somewhere secure for themselves to be, somewhere where they can grow their food, somewhere where they can reach their fullest potential, somewhere that they don't have to pay for to begin with and continue to pay for in order to maintain, because it's not about ownership, it's about custodianship. See, it's just a different syntax, it's just a different way of viewing the land that you happen to live on. people would say, oh, I need ownership. I need to know I have ownership of it so no one can come and throw me off. I need to have ownership of it because I need that security. But they're forgetting that that only comes because of the economic model that's been superimposed over reality, which is simply an effective method of keeping people in scarcity and eventually dispossessing them. Without that model, there is no concept of ownership, there is no concept of scarcity, there is no need for financial security. It's just a completely different way of looking at things. And what's required really is for people to simply step back and view things in a different way, view things from a different perspective, and imagine the concept of custodianship if that were superimposed over ownership. Look at the difference it would create. The difference it would create in the human psyche even would be enormous. People would view themselves and view their relationship to the earth in a completely different manner, just by changing the syntax from ownership to custodianship. It would have an enormous effect. But you see, folks, what ownership is really all about is dispossession. That's what it brings. That's what it's for. That's why people have been tricked into supporting this economic model that places them in scarcity and tricked into believing they can own something as permanent as the earth. It's all just a mechanism that's been used to trap people and been used to trick people into believing that if they can own the earth, then someone else can own the earth. That's what it's all about, folks. It's about dispossessing the people and transferring perceived ownership of the planet into private hands. That's what the whole economic model is about. That's what the whole concept of ownership is about. Really, it's about the opposite of what it pretends to be. And this is always the way, and I've spoken to you about this a great deal lately, how everything that is created within this fictional system is designed to mirror that which is real, but give it a meaning opposite to its original intention. The concept of custodianship, when you look at the earth and you view yourself as a custodian of the planet, it conveys the concept of a unique and powerful relationship between yourself and the earth to you. But the syntax of ownership conveys a completely different relationship. It suggests possession, and possessions can change hands. Possessions can be lost. Possessions can be stolen. Possessions can be bought. And so therefore it has placed you in a position where you are in danger of losing your heritage simply because you perceive that you own it. But you don't own the earth, my friends. You're only here for a little while. If anything, the earth owns you. Now, this whole concept of ownership has been going on for a really long time. I mean, this goes way, way back, folks. But really, when you can perceive that through ownership comes dispossession, and that really the secret is custodianship, you really do begin to see a higher harmonic with all of this. It's like when I say when you look at the legal system and you realise that the people that are creating the legal system are simply people just like you, and that they're only able to create it because they hold positions of trusteeship, and that this whole thing is really all based on a trust agreement, a trust relationship. It's also a higher harmonic. It's kind of like that. It's the same sort of thing, looking at the economic model and looking at the whole ownership idea. It's just stepping above it and seeing it the same as looking at the trust agreement that exists between you and government. It's also a higher harmonic than the legal system. So you're stepping above it there and just looking down and just seeing what's really going on here. I mean, there are still countries on earth where you can get free land. When I was in Peru last year, I found out that if you are a native Peruvian and you wish to go and build a place somewhere, go and build a hut or do whatever you want to do, you can just walk into any government-controlled land and you can set yourself up and stake your claim and say, well, this is where I want to be. And if you make the land work for you and you build your little place, well, the government will give you the land. Because it's your heritage to have land. It's your heritage to have somewhere that you can be in custody of, and you can be a good custodian of the land. And of course, with that type of a relationship, you want to look after the place because you want to have something viable to hand down to your children. You want to create something that works. Not something that's based on an economic model. You don't want land that you have to exploit in order to collect the paper you need to be alive because you have to keep paying for the land. And that whole system is designed to simply dispossess you. It'll dispossess everybody who perceives they own land under that model. That's why that model has been given to people and spread out so far around the world. But yet there are still some places where it's different. Some places where you can simply go and stake your claim and be the custodian of that land. And that's the sort of thing that we need to get back to, because there's no reason why everybody should be kept in scarcity, and there's no reason why everybody should be forced to give up their heritage in order to support a privately run and privately created economic model. And this is the fact of the matter, folks. It's privately created and it's privately run, and we need to stop and think about what we're doing here. We're allowing ourselves to be dispossessed of our heritage in order to support a private economic model. And this has been superimposed over our lives by public trustees. This is what I'm getting at with all of this, folks. And I hope you can understand what I was saying about the different syntax between ownership and custodianship. Because ownership implies possession, possessions can be lost. Custodianship is something permanent, and it implies a completely different relationship. It suggests a completely different intention between yourself and the land on which you live. I mean, this is the way tribal cultures always lived in the ancient world. They always viewed themselves as custodians. They had their traditional hunting grounds, their traditional winter grounds. They were often quite nomadic. I mean, when I say they viewed themselves as custodians, they kind of did that without really thinking. They probably didn't really view themselves as anything. They simply knew what their relationship to the land was. And I'm using the term custodianship over ownership simply because I realise that I'm speaking mainly to Western society, and that the people that I'm speaking to mainly think in language and think with their left brain. So I'm attempting to just convey a different concept, a different way of looking at what your relationship to the earth is, because I truly believe that every generation that lives on this planet are custodians of the planet. I've done whole radio shows about this. I think that each of us are custodians. I think that our time here is one of custodianship in every way. I believe we are the custodians of freedom. We are the custodians of the future for our children, the custodians of the earth. And this is why we need to pay attention to what our governments are doing. We need to pay attention to what this system really is and what's happening around us, because I believe too many of us live our lives in a very complacent manner, something even bordering on apathy in many cases. And really, folks, I've said this before, but it isn't that people are consciously indolent. It's just that they're trained to be that way. They're trained to be apathetic. They're given myriads of rabbit holes to go down when they do see a problem, and they're trained to believe that the system is all-powerful and there's nothing that they can do to fix it. And I also believe that that is an illusion. I think the people that control things are very, very powerful, and they do control the world in very many ways, but they're not quite as powerful as we perceive them to be. I think that we are far more powerful, because no matter what they do to lock us down, no matter what they've tried, we keep creating new boundaries. We keep shifting the goalposts as much as they do. And the more they attempt to lock us down, the more people are waking up. So I think it's all working contrary to what the controlling hand wants it to. And though I believe there is a certain amount of urgency in addressing this situation, I certainly do not believe that all is lost yet. So really, when one steps back and looks at the concept of ownership as I've just presented it to you, it becomes apparent how diabolically clever this system really is, and how it is truly a reversal of everything that's natural. That's what the system does. It takes that which is good and natural, it creates a mirror image that looks the same, that actually has the opposite intention of the original. And that's something very clever, and that's really what ownership and custodianship is all about. Because, as I said, through ownership comes dispossession, but this can only be achieved via the imposition of the economic model over the minds of the people. Indeed, it's the economic model which even provides the concept of ownership. So really, where did it come from, and how did it get so well refined, and how did it get superimposed over the human psyche? What was it? What was the event that caused human consciousness to become so disconnected from the earth and so disconnected from our heritage that we would perceive the concept of ownership and the dispossession of our heritage that comes with it? Where did it come from? What was the event? And how was it then brought to the rest of the world to create the situation that we're now in? Where is it going? What is its intention? Where is it all leading? And what will be the final outcome? Those are things that we really do need to look at, because if we can understand that, we can see how it started, why it started, and where it's going. Once we can perceive that, we can find what the solution is to the problem. And that's really what we need to explore, because finding these things is key. Really, you could call it a life key. It's something that you need to understand in order to understand why we are in the situation that we're in, why you're kept in scarcity, and why the world functions the way it does. And you can see that this model has been superimposed over virtually every country on the planet now. The only people that aren't affected by this type of model are the very, very few tribal cultures that still live in the wilds of some of the continents. And these are people that we just quite haven't got to yet. But we're probably working on that in the back rooms of some big office somewhere, I'm sure. But anyway, folks, I think it's break time here, though, so I'll have to leave it there for now, and we'll come back and we'll discuss this a little bit more after the break. Thanks for spending this time with me today, and I'll speak to you again in a few minutes. Thanks for listening. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I've spent years of my life wondering how all of this came about, how we ended up in this situation. Because it's pretty obvious that we are in a situation, folks. The whole concept of ownership, the whole concept of rulers. See, rulers is another really interesting thing, folks. I mean, people claiming right to rule the planet via their DNA, claiming their DNA is more important than your DNA. Their DNA, their genetic bloodline gives them the right to rule over you. And this is basically what the kingly class is in all countries. You know, the European kingly class, the Asian kingly class, all those who position themselves as rulers and claim it through lordship or kingship or queenship or the right of the royal line of whichever royal line they claim to belong to. This is basically claiming a genetic right to rule over others. I mean, where did that come from? Well, really, when you look at it, where it came from is because of a misconception of what people are. It's a misconception. It's a misplacement of understanding, so that you are perceiving yourself as an owner rather than a custodian. Again, it's a mirror image of what things should really be. Because to claim royal power or royal ability or kingship over another is basically to dispossess everybody around you, to dispossess those you perceive you control. Suddenly you are taking possession of all of their heritage and you're giving them permission to use your stuff. But really it's not your stuff at all. It belongs to all. So again, the concept of kingship is really just a mechanism that's been used to dispossess others. And we also find that modern governments are mimicking this mechanism to a very large degree. Through the concept of ownership, they are tricking people into being dispossessed. They're doing this by promising the people ownership of something which they cannot own, because you cannot own the earth. See, this is how the earth can be stolen, folks. This is what I was alluding to in the first half of the show, this is how the earth is being transferred into private hands. It's how something that you cannot possibly own is being transferred into the hands of someone because people believe that you can own the earth, because they're trained to think that way. So, okay, the question is, where did it come from? How did it all start? And like I said, look, I've done years trying to figure this out and figure out what happened, what created the schism in human consciousness. What was it that disconnected us from the earth so effectively. And so have very, very many other people. And folks, of course, all we can do is speculate. I believe that there was a cataclysm that happened way back where the Great Flood happened. I believe that was a real event. And I believe that that was a pivotal event in shaping human consciousness. I think that disconnected us from our shamanistic traditions. It had the effect of fracturing society because it was a huge cataclysm that really altered the direction of human consciousness, and that created an opening for fear to get in and for a major shift in human consciousness to occur. And that was part of it. But really, when you look at the whole economic model that seems to have evolved from that, wondering where that came from is of particular interest. Because the economic model is what's been used to dispossess the earth. So we have to look at how this dispossession occurred. Whatever gave people the concept and the belief that they could own the earth? Where did it come from? And after much investigation, it would appear that this ownership concept actually came from early religious teachings. The whole concept of the promised land and all of this sort of stuff. This is where it seems to have come from, because you can't really promise someone a land until you can convince them that they can own that land. They wouldn't even want to own the land unless you had convinced them that ownership is real, and unless you had effectively managed to dispossess them from their heritage already and cause them to believe that they needed to own somewhere in order to be part of the earth, in order to be somewhere they had to own it. You have to convey this concept into the minds of people, but you have to dispossess them in order to do it. And that's where it appears to have come from, folks. It appears to have come from religious sources. The mere concept really of the covenant that was made in the Old Testament, I believe, when Abraham was promised the land of Israel by Yahweh. In that covenant, when that covenant was made, what we find is that this entity calling itself Yahweh, which is claiming to be God, has effectively dispossessed this man and his tribe. And then that tribe, the Judaic system, because usury actually finds its basis in the Talmud, the usurious monetary system actually finds its root in the Talmud, which is the Abrahamic system, if you will, if you really want to look at it. What we find is that in that covenant that was made, Abraham was effectively dispossessed, and then that tribe created a system which went out and effectively dispossessed the rest of the people of earth, and is still working to dispossess the people of the earth today. That would appear to be where it comes from if you really look at how usury has affected the modern world and how usury has affected the economic system. I mean, the whole usurious basis of the current economic model is what has created so much scarcity. That's what it's designed to do. That's how come you can say that the current economic model is designed specifically to create scarcity, is because it's based on usury. Usury is interest. Usury is a mechanism that is used to dispossess everybody that operate within the parameters of that system. That's what it's for. So we see that this is where the pact was made, and this is where the system came from. The covenant that was made between Abraham and Yahweh. So again, one would question who is Yahweh and what is the basis of the whole Judaic Christian system. And I really have spent a lot of years wondering all of this sort of stuff, folks. I mean, I look at all monotheistic religious systems. I question Islam as much as I question Christianity. I had some fine debates, actually, with some of my Muslim friends when I was in Palestine about the concepts conveyed by Islam and some of my beliefs. And we had some great debates, actually, regarding monotheistic religious systems. And the reason that I focus so much on Christianity on these shows is because it is through what I perceive to be a perversion of truth that has been conveyed to the world via the mechanism of the Christian system to be one of the major problems that we face in the world today. It's this perversion of truth which has allowed the creation of these huge corporate mechanisms and these huge military machines, and these huge systems of control that have been put in place that are currently destroying the world and destroying our society. This has all been a result of the perversions of truth that have been superimposed over the Western world via the mechanism of the Judaic Christian system. And there really is an awful lot of mind control that goes with this as well, folks, and that's been one of the more effective mechanisms that's been used, because many people who operate within the Judaic Christian system believe that their way is the only way, and that one needs to be of Judaic Christian persuasion in order to be truly civilized. And this is what we've seen with the encroachment of civilization and the imposition of civilization around the world. And it has been an encroachment. It's almost been like a cancer, where we've had this whole Vatican Judaic Christian system has gone out and basically civilized the rest of the world. And in order to civilize these people, what it's done is it's put people into permanent structures. It's localized populations and concentrated populations. It's put them into positions of scarcity by imposing an economic model over them, and it's superimposed a belief system over the ones that they already had, which basically makes it all okay for this to happen. And then via the mechanism of the economic model, they are able to transfer wealth around the planet, thereby marginalizing different cultures and different communities along the way, and homogenizing everything, creating an interdependence of communities so that each community loses its autonomy and becomes dependent upon other communities around the planet through a system that they determine to be free trade. And free trade, folks, is simply a form of opening up avenues to create interdependence and remove autonomy from different cultures so that everybody gets locked into the economic model. We're given a fictional society that we believe we need in order to survive. Then a state of interdependence is created to make us completely dependent upon all the other countries around us so that we cannot function within these parameters by ourselves. So therefore it enslaves everybody to the economic model. Thereby it puts everybody in a state where ownership is all, which means all of the wealth can be transferred into those who run the economic model. That's just the way it happens. And really when you step back and look at what's been done, this is what has been done. And it's like a fractal version of reality that exists inside reality that has all the reverse meaning of what reality is supposed to have. That may have sounded a little bit complicated, but that's kind of what it is, if people can just step back and see what's really going on here. Because when you can step back, what you can see is that humankind is living in an absolute matrix, and one of the main tools that has been used to perpetuate this matrix is the concept of ownership. And the concept of ownership is held in place by the three pathogens that I talked about on a couple of shows previously, where I talked about the economic pathogen, the social pathogen, and the religious pathogen. This is how society is structured, folks, and this is the mechanism that has been used to create scarcity and thereby dispossess people of their natural heritage. This is what civilization has done. This is what monotheism has done. And folks, look, all monotheistic religious systems are designed to create separation. They really are. I believe that everything you need is inside yourself. Some of the great conversations that I had when I was in Palestine, and I was talking about my beliefs of how the world is all energy and all of the things that I've talked about so often on this show, how we download our consciousness into ourselves, how we are all divine expressions of creation and we're all connected to Source. And some of my Muslim friends were saying to me, everything that you're saying is in the Quran, everything that you're saying is Islam. You are Islamic and you just don't know it yet. You haven't figured it out yet. And I would say to them, well, if everything that I'm saying is in the Quran and is in Islam, then my argument is, why do I need the Quran or Islam? If I have a direct connection to where this was written down in your book, why do I need the book? Because that's just a middleman. That's just getting in my way. I don't need the book if I have the direct connection already. Why would I allow a religion to get in the way? And we had these
with these back and forth conversations, and it was really quite interesting. But this is what I'm saying, folks. You don't need to have any type of belief system that really gets in the way of Source. I don't believe that you do. And if you look at the message that the Christ was apparently trying to give to people, this message also says that you don't need to have anything get in between you and Source, that you can achieve this state of consciousness on your own. The thing, though, that is insidious with what is contained in the Bible, when you look at the way the message of the Christ was interpreted, is that through the mechanism of the Christian system, the message actually is again a mirror image and conveys a message on the surface that appears to be one thing, but when looked at on a deeper level, suggests something quite the opposite. And this is where the system of control has been put in place, through the underlying tone of a lot of the concepts that are presented within the Christian religious system. And I believe this is mainly because it comes from Rome. It comes from this same source. It comes from the same control mechanism that started way back with the Abrahamic system that was put in place. And this goes way back to ancient Egypt and possibly even beyond that time. But I believe that this is the system that is still in place in the world today. And it's very powerful. It's very powerful in its economic and social and religious aspects. But as far as what it's doing to create the future, and as far as what it's attempting to do to lock humankind down and to move us towards this transhumanist agenda, it's actually very haphazard in what it's trying to do. A lot of what it's doing, it's just one big experiment. I mean, these people don't really know what the outcome to these experiments is going to be. You can't perform a genetic experiment on half of the human race and really know what the outcome is going to be, because everybody's biology is different. But there are things like this going on. I mean, the whole transhumanist agenda, this is very real and it is going on. And incidentally, it only seems to be going on in first world countries. That's something that I noticed while I was away, was that you do not see chemtrails or geoengineering in third world countries. You only find chemtrails exist in Europe, in the UK, in Ireland, in America, in Australia, only in first world countries, folks. There's none over Asia, there's none over Israel, there's none over Palestine, there's none over South America. So if these trails that these jets are leaving behind are simply contrails, as the authorities and the detractors of chemtrails would have us believe, then why do they not appear over every country where jets are used? Why do they only appear over first world countries? What is different about the atmosphere in first world countries that would allow jets to leave permanent contrails when these things are not found anywhere else in the world? That's a question that we can ask these people. So there is stuff going on. There is genetic modification going on. There is huge control systems being put in place. But it's haphazard. They're not all powerful. We actually have the power, and I believe a lot of that power is by how much power we give them. It's by what we believe is possible, what our intention is in what we do, and how much of the control grid we imagine to exist ourselves. That's why I think it's very irresponsible of many people out there in the alternate research community who are presenting only problems to people, but not solutions to people. Because if people only focus on the control grid and see the control grid as being all-powerful, then that's what they'll create. They won't ever see the opening. They won't ever see the opportunities. They won't ever see what this is really providing for human consciousness, which is a way out of the prison that we've already existed in for so long. See, people look at this and they think the prison is coming. No, folks, the prison is already here. You've been living in it for years, if not centuries. You've been living within a matrix. Now it's being exposed. Now we have the opportunity to step up to the plate and to claim our birthright, to reclaim our birthright, to remember who and what we are. You know, all we have to do is participate in reality. That's really all we have to do. And I've done so many talks where I've spoken about the need to respect each other and the need to forgive each other, the need to move forward from this point, to understand that nobody
around you, nobody in society, nobody that you've got any problem with has ever been given an even playing field. You've never been given an even playing field. We've never even really been allowed to find ourselves and realize who and what we are in order to be able to judge ourselves in any way that may be seen as realistically. Because we've just never had the tools, we've never had the mechanism, we've never had the understanding of reality that we need to be able to do this. But now we have. These sort of understandings are coming to the fore. These sort of understandings are coming into everybody's mind. Everybody is starting to figure out that we've been ripped off, we've been had, we've been given a false reality, and we've been taught to believe that it's real. But now we're waking up to the fact that there's more, there's so much more, and there's so much more we are capable of. It all comes down to what we imagine is possible. You know, everything that we've got in this world was created from imagination. The building that you're sitting in right now listening to this comes from someone's imagination. They had to imagine it in order to draw it, in order to build it. Ultimately, it comes from imagination. Everything we've created in this world is a product of our imagination. But sometimes we can be deceived, and we can live in a world that is a world of fantasy and not a world of imagination. That's the difference. Fantasies can never be real, but imagination can. That's why I believe they've helped lock us into a belief where fantasy is real. That's why they lock the kids into these gaming worlds. That's why they give you standards in society which can never be achieved. The poor women look at a billboard of a woman using a certain type of makeup, and there's this beautiful woman on the billboard, and they're taught to believe that if they use this makeup, they can look as beautiful as this woman. But this woman's been photoshopped. She's been manipulated. Everything's been done to make her look that way. Even she can't look that beautiful. It's a fantasy. And this fantasy has been used to capture your imagination. So your imagination is led astray, and it's locked within a world of fantasy. And again, we see this system presenting something to you which looks like reality, but is in fact a mirror image that has the opposite intention of what the original had. And this is what our society has done, and this is all around us. And so much of this is a distraction, and it's all a distraction from you. It's a distraction from you ever knowing yourself and truly knowing the people around you. It's a distraction from you ever seeing the solutions that exist and the opportunities that exist within the problems that we all face. And that's exactly what it's designed to do. It's put there so you'll never find the truth. You'll always be looking for the truth in something external for yourself, and you'll always be attempting to measure yourself up to yardsticks which are completely unachievable because they are fantasy. The fantasy has been used to capture your imagination and to lead you from your path. But it's not real. It's a mirror. It's fiction. And I just think that it helps when people can see this. Because when we can see it, when people really do perceive what's going on around them, I think we're going to realize how powerful we are, what our imagination has actually created, but how our imagination has been captured and caused us to create things that we don't really want. You know, we've been captured, our imagination and our intention has been captured, and it's been used to lead us in directions that are not beneficial to humankind, not beneficial to life on this planet at all. You know, our intention within this system has been captured and trained to service one of the three pathogens that mostly affect our mind. Our intention is usually focused in either serving the economic model, or serving the social model, or serving the religious model. Sometimes all at the same time, and yet all of these three things are simply pathogens that lead us away from ourselves, lock us away from our true path. And if our intention being captured within these three pathogens wasn't bad enough, what we've been trained to believe is possible by operating within the parameters of these three pathogens is in fact all fantasy. The problem is
that this fantasy has been used to capture our imagination. Because none of the economic rungs that we're taught we can actually aspire to and really truly achieve can ever be truly achieved, because the economic system itself is designed to eventually pull the rungs out from beneath everybody and transfer all wealth into the hands of those who control the economic model. The social systems we've been told to aspire to and the social rungs on the ladder can never be achieved because they are all related to the economic model. They are all related to how much stuff you own, which all comes back to the economic pathogen. And the religious aspirations that we're taught we are to achieve can also never be achieved because they are all based on a monotheistic patriarchal religious concept, which is ultimately designed to impoverish and dispossess just as much as all of the other systems. Indeed, it is the imposition of the religious system above all else which caused the dispossession to occur. And I really do think it's time that we woke up to all of this, folks. I think it's time that we woke up to the power that we've got. And we woke up to what we're swimming in. We woke up to the fact that we are being dispossessed. And it's happening on a global scale. We're being dispossessed and we're being locked down. Something that we've got to understand here, folks, is that the world is truly being run by psychopaths. And so there is no point operating within the parameters of the system that they provide for us to use, because it is a psychopathic system that has been used to dispossess and manipulate the mind of man. It's a system that has brought endless amounts of destruction and hardship and pain and suffering for the people of the world at large. And it's a system that will continue to function and will continue to stay in place until we address the problem. And as I've said so many times, that's only going to come once we learn to respect each other and we begin to remember what our true role on this planet is, which is one of benevolent custodianship. That's what we should be. We have to take responsibility for this situation by taking responsibility for ourselves. That's the one thing that we're missing. We always seem to forget that true freedom is actually self-responsibility. That's what it is, folks. We have to find ourselves. We have to take responsibility for this situation. We have to realize what we are, understand that our government are simply public trustees, rein the ship of state in, and change the direction that we're heading in. And we can only do that through the power of community. We're only going to have the power of these communities once we begin to respect each other. We're only going to do that once we've learned to respect and to forgive ourselves. You can respect and forgive yourself, folks. You can see your own perfection because it is there. As I've so often said, no one can be you better than you can. And being you is what you came here to do and to be. So step into that role. Just be who you are. Understand that everybody around you is just as perfect and just as unique as yourself. And together we can achieve great things. But that is it for me, folks. That is the end of the show for this week. It's been a pleasure speaking to you again. Thank you to anybody who has ever made a contribution to the website. Thank you for all the supportive mail that you send me. Thank you again to all the people in Nannup, Western Australia, who came to the talk last weekend. It was a pleasure to meet you all. I will look forward to speaking to you again next week, folks. Please take care until then, and do stay positive and do realize the power that you have. Because through forgiveness and understanding of yourself, you do have the power to bring about some positive change. Each of us can do this. Indeed, we are the only ones who can. In Lakesh, my friends, in Lakesh.